You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
Happy Wednesday. Here on the Dolphins Talk Weekly episode, I am your host, Kevin Dern. You can follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow the show at DolphinsTalk.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. It's been a while, folks. I'm sorry I am late getting out the recap episode over the Jets, the 30-0 shutout win the Dolphins had this past Sunday. And I'm sorry to record midweek, dealing with a 1-year-old who has croup, and that progressed into pneumonia. So it's been a rough couple days here at the Dern household, but I think things are finally on the mend, and was able to get out earlier today and take the 3-year-old to the Cincinnati Zoo for Festival of Lights. So that was a fun daddy-daughter date night. And it's been a busy couple of weeks. I did not have an episode after the game against Tennessee because I was traveling and had a pretty packed work schedule once I got back. So apologies for skipping an episode and then being late with this one. Hopefully we will be back on a regularly scheduled program. My goal, since the game is on Christmas Eve and we'll be celebrating with my wife's family that evening, I'll probably try and get the Dallas recap episode up Monday night, Christmas night, or Tuesday at some point for you guys. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And first order of business, wanted to welcome in 2 new members to the Dolphins Talk family. Marissa Marino has come in and done great things in just under a month on Twitter. Her handle is mustbemarissa87. Been a very cool thing to see her rise on the Dolphins Twitter and being new. And then wanted to welcome in Steven Daniels as well with the Clock Blockers show. Very cool additions by Mike to the Dolphins Talk family. So welcome Marissa, welcome Steven. This week's episode, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We'll kind of talk about my trip to Miami for the Tennessee game, and then kind of quick hit the Jets game, because at this point you've probably listened to multiple other podcasts and heard about how the Dolphins shut out the Jets and what that means and implications going forward. So we're just going to kind of go off the cuff with this one and bring back a little bit more X's and O's from the last 2 games, some things we might see going forward. As my unofficial co-host, our lovely Pit Lab, Chloe, has come down to the recording studio to join me for this podcast. But first order of business as we kick off the show is our whiskey segment. Tonight we're going with something a little bit different because it's midweek. It's been a long couple weeks for me with travel and work and sick children and all of the above, and had to fight the crowd at the Cincinnati Zoo. If you're ever in town and get to check out the Festival of Lights, it's one of the best light shows you're going to see anywhere in the country. But it was crowded tonight on a Wednesday. So we've got the Port Charlotte heavily peated offering tonight just because I need something a little heavier. Here we go. Always a fantastic sip. That's a good one, especially if you enjoy the peat flavor of Scotch, but you don't want to expose yourself to something on the level of an Ardbeg quite yet. That's a good bridge from Lagavulin, Lafroig, any other Isle of Scotch, on up to the Ardbeg level of peat. So that one, on a scale of 5 stars, I'd probably give that, a 4.1, 4.2. Really good when you need that extra peat flavor. Not quite as good as a Lafroig in my book, but that's still a winner if you enjoy that. So big weekend for me sports-wise because we got the trifecta. My beloved Arsenal won 2-0 over Brighton over the weekend and retook the top spot in the Premier League, so that was good. Took my wife out for her birthday Saturday night, so missed my alma mater, the Dayton Flyers, come to Cincinnati and put a hurting on the University of Cincinnati, winning 82-68 over the Bearcats. Did not expect that. Dayton playing pretty well despite having their starting point guard go down with a torn LCL 7 minutes into game 1 of the season. And they actually won earlier tonight, finishing off their game, as they, I think, have 2 more contests before conference play begins in the new year. Should win the remaining 2 non-conference games. So a nice start for the Flyers. But most importantly, the team that we all love and the team that we're here for, the Dolphins, a 30-0 shutout win over the Jets. Now, we'll talk about that game more in a little bit, but wanted to say yours truly went down to Miami for the Monday night game against Tennessee. And just kind of wanted to recap the experience of that. First of all, need to give out 2 really quick shout-outs. Number 1, to my good buddy, former podcast host, and longtime friend. I know, Chloe, you're my best longtime friend. But Travis Wingfield, thank you very much for hooking up myself and my brother-in-law, Matt, on our trip down to South Florida. Everything from tickets to parking to restaurant reservations to getting to hang out with you and watch the Sunday games, having a few beers, having some cocktails. It was very enjoyable to catch up with you, dude, and love to see your work with the Dolphins. And then shout out number 2 goes to the man, Juice, OJ McDuffie. Got a chance to meet him before the game started on Monday. Couldn't be a nicer guy, fellow Ohio native like myself. Just really cool to get to kind of chop it up with him for a couple brief minutes before he had to go back and do the pregame show on the radio broadcast for the Dolphins and all that. So Travis, Juice, thank you guys very much. It was a very enjoyable weekend and pretty enjoyable game until like the last 2 minutes. And, you know, really, I thought Hard Knocks this week, the episode which covers the, practices leading up to the Jets game, really kind of encapsulated it, because Hard Rock Stadium was an absolute powder keg ready to explode in that Monday night game. And forgive me if I can't remember the exact sequence here of the injuries, but Xavier Howard got dinged up on the first 3rd down of the game. Like 3 plays into the game, he's dinged up, has to walk off. And then Tyreek Hill gets dinged up and walks off. And then Connor Williams, I didn't exactly see what happened to him from where we were sitting, because everything was on the far end of the field, because I was in the end zone. So that everything was on the opposite end from where we were at that point. Really took the wind out of the sails. And then, Tennessee did everything in their power to hand Miami the game. And then to collapse like that was just kind of unbelievable. Never really seen anything like it. I don't remember the exact statistic about however many games there were and being up by 14 points with under 2 minutes and whatever stat, however many times teams had gone undefeated and the Dolphins being the first team to blow it, if that stat's even true, was just like the rug got pulled out from under you. And then, the offense stunk most of that game, especially the passing game. The running game was fine. Mostert, Achane did what they did. But you never really... The play calls were out of sync. The red zone... To be fair, Tennessee had the number 2 red zone defense in the league going into that Monday night game. Just everything felt out of sync without Tyreek. But even then, like, the play calls were off. The offensive line was off. Tennessee did a great job of protecting the middle of the field. And say what you want about the Titans and Vrabel, but the 2 times they've played Tua in his career, they've torn Tua a new asshole twice. And both doing it different times, different ways. that's a team that, interconference could pose some problems down the road in future years, especially if Will Levis is kind of the real deal. The Titans with some better roster management could be a formidable foe down the road. But one of the cool things that Hard Knocks captured this week was that Mike McDaniel was in his office watching film at 4 a.m. on Tuesday morning, which, that game ended at almost midnight. I think it was like 11:40 when that game ended. And I'll just say this. I don't know how season ticket holders handle the parking situation at Hard Rock Stadium. That is miserable compared to most other stadiums I've been to. That said, Hard Rock Stadium, by far the nicest stadium I've been to, just ahead of Lucas Oil and Lambeau Field, which are absolutely phenomenal. If you ever get the chance to go to Indy or Green Bay, do it. But Hard Rock is by far the nicest stadium I've been to. That parking situation needs fucking major help. That is a disaster in and of itself. That being the case, we know from the Jeff Darlington segment earlier in the year that if Mike McDaniel went home, he lives all the way in Fort Lauderdale, he probably wasn't home very long before he turned around and came back and started watching film early in the morning. I kind of wonder if he even went home. But the cameras did a great job of capturing kind of the solemn, atmosphere, when Tua and Tyreek were talking about the game and watching it and asking how Tyreek's ankle was. And, kudos to Mike McDaniel for kind of spinning that devastating loss on its head and getting the performance we got out of it, against the New York Jets with a lot of key pieces missing for the Dolphins. That was, all things being equal, a pretty sensational performance by the Dolphins on Sunday. And we'll kind of dive into that game. And I thought, I had to wake up early Sunday morning for my wife's actual birthday, which was that Sunday. And now she has had 2 birthdays on Dolphins game days, both against the Jets. Both are wins, strangely enough. So we need to play the Jets on my wife's birthday more frequently. I won't get into details about my birthday. If you know the sad story about the Dolphins playing on my birthday, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there, which will likely happen again here in about a month. Neither here nor there for tonight, though. But Michael Leva had a great point before the game. That Jets game and how the Dolphins performed was going to tell us a lot of things about 2 people, Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa. And I'll just address this because it's been addressed to me on Twitter. The morning after the Titans loss, I tweeted out that Mike McDaniel reminds me of Jim Tressel. Now that's a deep cut, and I know there were multiple people out there who I think understood it. 2 of them are pretty good friends of mine, so I don't know that necessarily counts as that metaphor getting across, and I certainly don't mean from a fashion sense. You've got Givenchy and Gucci and Prada for McDaniel versus the sweater vest Jim Tressel. Certainly not what I meant. It was more a note on performance in big games, and unless you're an Ohio State fan, you probably don't remember the Tressel era other than maybe for Maurice Clarett, Terrell Pryor, and all the tattoos and that scandal. But Tressel, pretty good coach, I thought. Certainly a guy you would want to represent your team and your school. Could always coach well when the team had a lead or, it was kind of a back and forth game, but you never trailed by more than 7. But if you put them in a tough spot, in a tough moment, his team at Ohio State generally folded. Look no further than the national championship game against Florida. trying to think of another example. I know there's one big one that I'm missing off the top of my head, but, couldn't coach when the team was down and couldn't coach in big moments. And often the team kind of crumbled in big moments. And we kind of see that with Dolphins under Mike McDaniel, through, let's call it, a year and 3 quarters. They, in particular, the offense, if we're looking at this year, did not play well against Kansas City, did not play well against Philly, played well for about a quarter and a half against Buffalo, didn't play well most of that game against the Titans. The defense, you could say, played pretty well against Tennessee until the last 2 minutes. Played well against Kansas City, held Mahomes to like a season low, held the Chiefs to all kinds of bad stuff that day. Played well against Philly. Really, the Buffalo game is the only game where, Vic Fangio's had a bad plan, used personnel poorly, and the execution just wasn't there. More often than not, it's been the offense that kind of crumbles in these big situations. And with all the losses that the Dolphins had going into that game, and then no Tyreek, basically only Jalen Ramsey and Kader Kohou starting in your secondary, you've already lost Jalen Phillips, you have lost Connor Williams, Isaiah Wynn, on the O-line. That's a tricky defense to have to go against. And the Jets, for their part, who had like the 3rd worst run defense in the league going into that game, basically snuffed out Miami's run game. They held them to like 77 yards on like 23, 25 carries, whatever it was. Kudos to Mike McDaniel for the game plan and the adjustment. Kudos to Tua Tagovailoa for executing the game plan, damn near perfectly. The one bad throw I can think of is the play, the out route where Quincy Williams got his hand on it and almost had a pick 6. And it kind of gave you flashbacks of the Black Friday game for a minute. But to Mike Oliva's point, Dolphins Talk himself, to Mike's point, McDaniel rose to the occasion, had the team rise to the occasion. Tua rose to the occasion. And, I'd have to look it up, but what felt like probably their worst performance of the year in terms of rushing offense, Tua played very, very well, especially, having to adjust, and they lost Austin Jackson in the game to the oblique injury. Sounds like he'll be good to go for the Dallas game. Little insider, sounds like everyone other than maybe Javon Holland should be good to go for that Dallas game coming up. Played very well. Tua played very, very well. And I think given the circumstances, that response against the Jets was perfectly appropriate. The defense was dominant. You eliminated their run game, held them to like 23 yards, completely shut that down. You had Zach Wilson obliterated so much in the first half that he left the game. However many, 5 or 6 sacks and 4 turnovers and almost another defensive score. Held the Jets to I think 5 out of 14 on 3rd downs. And you did that with, Emmanuel Ogbah got hurt in the game. You did that with Cameron Goode getting 30-some% of the snaps when he's barely ever played defense for Miami. Eli Apple hadn't been active in a couple weeks, came out, played a flawless game. But some of the cool stuff that I think goes underlooked, and this is stuff I want to see in terms of what Vic Fangio did, some X's and O's here. 2 cool things that he did, and we'll talk about the offense with a cool thing that they did. Number 1, if you go, I've looked through my Vic Fangio playbook that I have, which is from the 2017 Chicago Bears when he was the defensive coordinator there. They will run a tilt front, which, if you remember some of the podcasts I talked about when we had Brian Flores and Josh Boyer, is what the Patriots would, or Dolphins for that matter, would call their extend front. So if you want to see what that is, go back and watch the Patriots Super Bowl victory over the Rams, and essentially that defense that they played where you've got 4 guys on the line of scrimmage plus your 2 outside backers walked up, or an outside backer and a safety walked up. That's an extend front. That's what Fangio calls his tilt front. Miami would show a 3-4 style front, and then they would shift. So like that first sack where Christian Wilkins kind of tripped up Wilson, and then Bradley Chubb came in with the finishing move for the fumble when Zach Sealer recovered. Miami shifted from a 3-4 look to a tilt front. They put David Long out on the edge, not normally an edge defender. Everyone kind of reduced down. So you ended up with Andrew Van Ginkel lined up where Christian Wilkins normally is. Christian Wilkins went from playing 3 technique to playing like a shade nose. And that really messed up the Jets' protection scheme. And it's very similar to something that Bill Belichick kind of used. Brian Flores and Josh Boyer used it here in Miami, specifically with Eric Rowe. The Patriots used it with Patrick Chung, and they called it their marble or their point front, where you had like an extra defender walked up on the tight end. Fangio did that a little bit differently because in the marble and the point front, that safety was what you would call either inserted or over the tight end with an edge defender still outside. Fangio did this and kept that inserted player to the outside of the edge player. So David Long was outside Andrew Van Ginkel, and on that play, David Long basically drops into coverage, and it looks like he has some sort of zone drop with a green dog tag where if his guy stays in the block, you can rush. Because David Long does not come flying up off the snap, but it totally mucks up what the Jets did. Then behind that, without Xavier Howard in the lineup, they had Jalen Ramsey shadow Garrett Wilson, the Jets' best receiver. So we saw Ramsey line up left corner, right slot, left slot, with Kader Kohu and Eli Apple outside. Who did we play the week before the Titans game? I'm drawing a complete blank here. Yes, Washington, the Commanders. They had used some what you would tag as a Meg coverage. I don't know the exact terminology that Fangio uses, but essentially they had Jalen Ramsey match up on Terry McLaurin no matter where he went. And that was really, in my eyes, the first time we've seen that happen since Ramsey's return. I don't think we saw anyone do it prior to Ramsey. I have to wonder, with CeeDee Lamb coming to town and being the weapon he is, and up until this past Sunday, how hot Dak Prescott's been, I wonder if we see some of that, even if Xavier Howard is able to play, which sounds like he should be able to, just to kind of mitigate that Dallas defense. So I think this is a new pair of wrinkles, kind of that over-exaggerated tilt front. You could even hear it on Hard Knocks where Zach Sealer calls out slide right, and the whole front slides to the right, not just the D-line, but the linebackers as well, the edge players as well. And then you've seen some use of Jalen Ramsey kind of playing everywhere. It's a very interesting wrinkle to have to deal with. And, you know, since Ramsey's return, the Dolphins have been giving up like 15.3 points a game, which is phenomenal. I went through it again. You know, if you look at all else being equal across the NFL, if you remove the 47 points that are attributable to the offense and special teams, we'll go through them real quick. Kickoff return by the Broncos. Tua's pick six against the Giants. Mike White's pick six against the Panthers. Tyreek Hill's fumble return for touchdown against Kansas City. Tua's pick six against the Jets. That's 35 points right there, 5 touchdowns. And then you had 4 field goals. Tua and Julian Hill both had fumbles in the Raiders game in field goal range. Tua had the other interception in the Giants game in field goal range. And then Raheem Mostert had the fumble against the Patriots in field goal range. 47 points essentially handed to the other team when the defense was not on the field. If you take out those 47, Miami right now, they're giving up like 21 points a game, which is like 14th in the league. If you take away the 47 points that essentially the defense is not responsible for, that average drops to like 17.6 points per game, which is 4th in the league. So it's been pretty damn good all season long. So that was a nice, nice wrinkle to see kind of sprinkled in over the last, 3 games. Excuse me. Pardon me. Illnesses run rampant in our household, so you'll have to pardon me for that. And then offensively, the way that McDaniel kind of changed up the game plan where the heavy utilization of screens, get the ball out quick, find ways to get Jalen Waddle open across the middle. If I'm a Jets fan, I would be absolutely irate for as much of a defensive genius as Robert Saleh is supposed to be. Why in the blue hell would you not have Sauce Gardner shadow Jalen Waddle? And it's not because it's a left-right thing. Sauce Gardner played on both sides, right and left, at the University of Cincinnati. I've seen it for myself multiple times in person. The dude is a phenomenally talented corner. Robert Saleh, what is you doing on defense? Like you're trying to play a wide 9 with quarters and cover 3 variations behind it. You don't have the personnel for it. I don't know what he and Joe Douglas are doing. But I mean, like, that's an easy fix that makes some of the easy fixes Fangio had to do at the early of the season look like fucking trigonometry. Like, what is Robert Saleh doing? I guess I shouldn't complain. I hope he's the coach there next year because they're going to be pretty shitty again, even if they have Aaron Rodgers with stuff like that going on. Sorry, I just can't stand bad defense, so I had to call that out. Sorry, Dolphins fans. But very cool way to see Mike McDaniel employ the offense and how to get them going, how to spark Jalen Waddle going. Kind of got Braxton Berrios involved more, got Raheem Mostert involved in the passing game some more. Just pretty cool wrinkles, and I think it's interesting that they've got Chris Brooks coming back because Miami had a nice run of him kind of using Brooks in that Alec Ingold role. And then also, if we remember our old buddy Trent Sherfield from last year, doing some of those blocking things that Trent Sherfield used to do, which I hate to jump ahead to free agency, but if you're looking at this wide receiver core, you've got Hill, Waddle, and Eric Ezukama basically under contract next year. Everything else is up in the air. Do yourself a favor on Christmas night. Watch the 49ers and watch Jawan Jennings, number 15. That dude is the ideal receiver to have in the slot for this offense. If the 49ers let him sniff free agency, I hope the Dolphins are all over that. That's a great buy low, add value, and sell high type of ad. That could be a tremendous fit in this offense. Anyway, Chris Brooks coming back is kind of a unique, I won't say game changer, but adds another wrinkle, adds another layer to what you can do offensively with Mostert, Achane, Brooks on the field. They call it the Fast 21 personnel or Pony personnel. A lot of cool stuff that you can do. So that's one thing I'm looking to see Sunday if Chris Brooks is active. How do they splice him in? And then how do you reconcile some of those snaps between he and Alec Ingold? Because they're both good at doing the same thing. Both pretty big dudes. Both pretty athletic. Be cool to see how they incorporate that wrinkle. And I think some of that is the role that Eric Ezukama would have had he not sustained the neck injury the week after the New England game in between weeks 2 and 3. And this is a cool opportunity for the Dolphins. Not much more for me to say about the Jets game. I think schematically, the Dolphins got a lot of things corrected and got a lot of things right in terms of game planning and corrections from the Tennessee game to the Jets game. And I think that showed on Hard Knocks. That was very much a cathartic win. You kind of got that bad juju out of your system. And let's be honest, we're going to address the elephant here in the room momentarily. Everything for the Dolphins is still out there to play for. You have a playoff scenario available to the Dolphins this week. If they beat the Dallas Cowboys, they punch a ticket to the playoffs. They are in no matter what happens. But you can take that further. If you beat Dallas and then go to Baltimore and win, the Dolphins win the AFC East. They will be mathematically ahead of Buffalo no matter what happens in Week 18 and no matter what the Bills do this week and next. And if they win out, if they beat Dallas, Baltimore, and Buffalo, Miami will clinch the number 1 seed in the AFC, no matter what any other team does. So with that in mind, here's a quick 3-game rooting guide for Christmas weekend. 2 of these 3 results that would benefit Miami, in my opinion, are pretty unlikely. But root for the Chargers and Easton Stick and Jeff and Gif and Biff and whoever they have running that show now. I'll take a quick pause here and pour a little bit of this Port Charlotte heavily peated from the Brooklotti distillery, by the way. Pour a drink out for a fellow Dayton Flyer. The Los Angeles Chargers coach Brandon Staley is a Dayton alum. Probably a little bit over his skis in terms of what he was doing, going from Division III defensive coordinator to NFL head coach in 5 years. I hope he lands on his feet and gets at least a position coaching job next season. But for a Chargers roster that had that much talent, I'm surprised they didn't fire him after they had that epic collapse in the playoffs last year against Jacksonville. But Brandon Staley, a fellow Flyer, here's to you. Good luck, best wishes. But that's game number 1. Root for the Chargers to miracle their way to victory against the Bills. I believe that's on Festivus night. If you're a Seinfeld fan, you'll get that. It's on Saturday. Raiders over the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City is behind Miami in the standings by a game, but they hold 2 tiebreakers over Miami at the moment. They have a head-to-head win, and they also have a better conference record at the moment because the Dolphins lost to Tennessee. So if they are to catch the Dolphins record-wise, they will surpass the Dolphins in the playoff seedings. So root for Antonio Pierce and the Raiders. And then the big one, the silver donut, in the words of Harry and Marv, the Wet Bandits. I had promised my wife I'd sneak in a Christmas reference somewhere, and Home Alone is a great Christmas movie. Second on my list, only to A Christmas Story. That's more of a personal backstory reason for that. So you can flame me all you want. The Ravens travel to San Francisco to take on the 49ers Christmas night. We are 49ers fans in that one. Because if they win and Miami wins against Dallas, Miami will, at least for the time being, jump to the number 1. Or no, wait. I think it would still be the same now because Miami did have a tiebreaker in the AFC over Baltimore. But because of the Tennessee loss, they would basically be even. And I believe Baltimore pulls ahead on strength of victory and strength of schedule. So that head-to-head game against Baltimore would be huge, especially if San Francisco wins. Now, if Miami wins anyway, you get the tiebreaker back. So those are the 3 games to root for. And then, of course, you've got the Sunday game, 4:25, Christmas Eve, against the Dallas Cowboys. Hopefully, Dolphins fans pack Hard Rock Stadium and drown out the Cowboys' noise, because they travel well. The big game narratives are all about this one. You have the Cowboys, who've beaten teams with winning records, Seattle, Philadelphia, both at home. The Cowboys have been bad on the road. Dallas this year, 7-0 at home, 3-4 on the road. And the Dolphins narrative, and this is a segment from the Rich Eisen show today, the Dolphins have yet to beat a team with a winning record at the time they play them. I guess you can kind of retroactively count the Broncos game for that time, but they're now back to 500. Miami 6-1 at home. You look at Dallas on the road. Of their 4 losses, 3 of them have been massive. 28-16 at Arizona, 42-10 at San Francisco, and then 31-10 at Buffalo this past Sunday. The Bills ran for like 266 yards. And I think Dallas had a top 6 or 7 run defense going into that game. And the Bills don't run the ball well historically. James Cook had himself a day. Dallas now 19th in the league against the run, giving up 117 yards a game. So that's not a huge amount. But there's room for exploitation there, especially if Jonathan Hankins, who was injured in that Buffalo game, is not able to play. But Cowboys defense is pretty stingy. They're 5th in points allowed. Again, they're 18.9 points per game. Miami would be 4th ahead of Dallas at 17.6 if you take out the points that are not attributable to the defense, which means points attributable to offense and special teams. Dallas offensively, 6th in passing offense, 12th in running offense. They are 2nd in the league in points per game at 30.8 per game. Our beloved Dolphins are 1st at 31.5 per game. And this category kind of surprised me. Miami takeaways this year, 22, which I think was in the top 8 in the league. Dallas right behind them with 21. But kind of the hidden stat there, Dallas's turnover margin is +9. Miami's is only +2. So this game, to me, feels like whichever team can stop the run and make the other one-dimensional feels like a race to 24 points. Whoever can get to that mark first, I think, wins. And you have some history with the coaching staffs. Mike McDaniel was on Dan Quinn's staff in Atlanta 2016-2017 before McDaniel went to join Kyle Shanahan with the 49ers. Obviously Matt Ryan had a tremendous season, MVP season. It's like the 2nd highest quarterback rating season ever. Not Brady, not Elway, not Marino, not Manning, not Favre. Matt Ryan boasts that. You've got some familiarity there, and I forget where I saw this statistic, and this was 2 weeks ago. At the time, the Cowboys were leading the league in coverage snaps that ended up in a true cover 1 look, meaning you're man-to-man on the outside with one middle-of-the-field safety. So it's middle-of-the-field closed, which, as analogy for Dolphins fans, essentially what we ran the entire Brian Flores and Josh Boyer era. Man-to-man outside, one safety. This basically morphs itself to a lot of cover 3 looks, which makes sense because Dan Quinn was involved in that system in Seattle, and that's Pete Carroll's baby is the under front with a cover 3 behind it. That bodes well for Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and the passing game, provided, there's a proviso here, you can figure out how to eliminate Micah Parsons. Now, Miami did a damn solid job of eliminating Max Crosby a month or so ago in that Raiders game after the bye. As good as Max Crosby is, Micah Parsons is a bit of a different animal. Faster, stronger, better first step, can play multiple spots, not just defensive end. He can play stack linebacker. You can blitz him from either the middle or the weak side. You can play him as a strong side end, weak side end. He can put his hand in the dirt. He can stand up. He is essentially what Von Miller was back when Von Miller was a young player in Denver, but bigger. So Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, as Bill Parcells would say, this is a big boy pants game coming up here. So that's the key. I think if you can stop the Dallas run game, you can mitigate Micah Parsons. I think those create conditions to where Miami's defense will be successful. If you want some, like for instance, about how they've played Dak, look back at I believe it's the 2020 season when Fangio was the Denver head coach. Look what they did. They went into Dallas with like 4 brand new starters at linebacker that day and beat the Cowboys like 30-16 and made Dak look pretty damn bad. That's a reference point. And I think those conditions, if you can limit Micah Parsons, you can run on this team, especially if Jonathan Hankins does not play. But you've got to get the line to play well. And, assuming Armstead and Jackson play and Rob Hunt comes back, that pressure kind of focuses squarely on Liam Eichenberg at center and most likely Robert Jones, who would play left guard in that situation ahead of Lester Cotton. You can do those things. I think you can win this game like 28-20, 27-23, something like that. That's what this game feels like. If Miami can hit those conditions, you've got to show you can play. Like, this is for a playoff spot, and if you want to get on a run here and silence those critics and doubters and end the narratives, which I hate that we use the term narrative all the time anyway nowadays, this is the game to win. Beat Dallas, beat Baltimore, and maybe you luck into a scenario where that Buffalo game doesn't even matter. I will say it's much more enjoyable to watch the rest of the league play when you're focused on seeding, rather than needing teams to lose so you can just clinch a spot. It's much more enjoyable, and this Dolphins season has been pretty damn enjoyable, save for a couple moments. I would love for the Dolphins to keep it going, and I'd love for all of you to keep listening to Dolphins Talk Weekly, all the other shows on DolphinsTalk.com, iTunes, Spotify, Dolphins Talk website itself. Please feel free to hit me up on Twitter at KevinMD4. Would love to hear your feedback about the show, or if you have observations about X's and O's from the game this week against Dallas, would love to hear them. Thank you guys for listening. Happy Hanukkah. I hope you have a Merry Christmas. And I hope the Dolphins can bring us all an extra present under the tree on Sunday. Fins up. Have a great holiday, everybody.